Hello and welcome to lecture number 15 for Postmodern and Contemporary. Contemporary architecture and recent and current architecture follows no overall style, drawing from the ongoing explosion of knowledge and materials and developments and computer engineering to create completely unique buildings across the global landscape. Each creation is an opportunity to redefine architectural possibilities in both usability and aesthetics. So there are a lot of different trends in contemporary architecture that have not coalesced into a specific style, but rather a lot of architects and up to the point where they're being called starchitects, famous architects are trying to do their own thing and make every single building count as like the biggest thing of that moment in history. Our first keyword in contemporary architecture and modern, postmodernist, but modern and contemporary architecture is sustainable architecture. It seeks to minimize the negative environmental impact of buildings by efficiency and moderation in the use of materials, energy, development space, and the ecosystem at large. Sustainable architecture uses conscious approaches to energy and conservation in the design of the built environment. So in sustainable architecture images, you just see a ton of green stuff on an otherwise regular looking building, but it's not just putting a bunch of plants on a building. It is using materials, reusing materials, or some recycled materials to both reduce the impact of building the building and the costs of maintaining the building and keeping it going through its lifespan. And sustainability also includes a plan for the end of life of structures, even structures made out of steel and concrete that may last hundreds of years, or we may not even know what their potential lifespan is, will eventually one day need to have an end of life plan. And so sustainability includes all of those things, and also the building's place as a space holder in its community. So, but you do see a lot of green space and interesting ways to include the environment. Carbon footprint reduction by having green space is a major way to make an environment sustainable. And sustainability also leads to a lot of interesting shapes and spaces, places to be in, and shapes of architecture, because including all of the things that are necessary, like dirt and water system and drainage, leads to very different shapes of buildings. Sustainability can come in a lot of different forms, sort of modern and more recent structures. And it can also be some of these like environmental installations that we see like this. Our next keyword is cross-laminated timber. If you've ever seen plywood, I'm sure you have in the scene shop or somewhere else, plywood is thin layers of wood glued together to make thin layers into a strong sheet good. So a sheet good is like 4 feet by 8 feet, or some can be bigger, and it's a surfacing. We use it on flats, we may use it on walls, we may build tables out of it. Before plywood, we just had whatever piece of rectangular wood you could cut out of a tree. If you needed a big one, you needed a big tree. So plywood is like a sheet good, up to, they can be an inch thick, but typically 3/4 or a quarter. Cross-laminated timber is when you take really big boards and you glue them together just like plywood. So you glue them in perpendicular directions, and that makes the grain fight against each other. It makes it really, really strong. Cross-laminated timber is an engineered wood product made by gluing lumber together in perpendicular layers, effectively creating a plywood out of boards. It's incredibly strong, and it's replacing steel and concrete buildings as a beautiful, sustainable way to create large structures, even skyscrapers. So as you can see here, this curtain-walled building has interior columns and an interior wall set of cross-laminated timber and plywood. It changes the color of a building, it changes the feeling and the mood of being in it or near it. Cross-laminated timber can also be engineered to be in lots of different shapes, because you could cut the wood before you glue it together, or you could alter it after you have made it. And so a lot of new possibilities in shape arise from cross-laminated timber. And in general, wood is considered to be a much more comfortable, homey feeling material that is natural, and it's what we're used to, as opposed to if this was all steel or all concrete, it would be a very different feeling building. So incorporating cross-laminated timber into structures is a natural and sustainable way because you can always grow more trees. In fact, that's a positive thing to do. And cross-laminated timber, you can glue these boards together so large that you can create beams large enough to build skyscrapers and very large buildings out of. And you can also do artistic things. So some of the shapes that we might have, that might be reminiscent of like Art Nouveau, can come back a little bit. Not to the point where we're going to have elaborate, intricate carvings and hand craftsmanship like that, but some hand craftsmanship and some beautiful organic shapes. And like I said, it can be included in very large structures and makes the whole thing feel a lot more natural. The next keyword is Blobitecture. Blobitecture is what it sounds like, but the reason it exists is from the 1990s to contemporary, an architectural style that featured organic, amoeba-like shapes, bubbles, and blobs, frequently using computer-aided design and exploring new materials and interior layouts. Blobitecture was one of the first styles to allow computers to determine the shape of a building by inputting and manipulating algorithms into and within a modeling program. So we're starting to get into computer-aided design, CAD, which is something that we do in the theater a lot, and it is completely taken over architecture and architectural visualization, so like 3D modeling to show what a building will be like. But Blobitecture became popular as an interesting new thing to do that gave you a very different structure. It can be very, very striking. In contemporary architecture, having a very striking facade to your building became important because as these structures grew in complexity, they got very expensive. And in order to justify that expense, they have to be remarkable. And so there are many different types of blobitecture. All of these, most of them beyond what a human being could not imagine, but to design, to correctly calculate how to do the blueprints and provide for the construction of these things. Some of them are quite beautiful, like this stadium in China. Some of them, inspire you to say that perhaps someone should lose their architectural licensing. But many of them are just pretty interesting, and it's signaled the beginning of computer-aided design. You can see blobitecture-based structures, like they're like concrete bubble pod houses and stuff that were part of like hippie architectural movements in the 60s and 70s, and that led to the interest in bubbles and blobs, kind of getting away from everything that had ever been done before. What else is there? Oh, blobs. Some of them are really, really cool, like this one here, a terrible photo. Our next keyword is very related to that. It's similarly parametric design. Parametric design produces absolutely incredible work that'd be very difficult for human beings to create without computers. And what it is using mathematics to interweave complexity and variety in a structure. For example, a wall of repeating patterns that subtly changes into a large curve over a distance. So here we see that very clearly, a bunch of slats and slices of wood that have been subtracted and have had a organic curve shape subtracted from them. And it makes this whole thing feel as if it is both man-made and scientific in its linear nature and extremely organic in the way that it's shaped like a seashell or something. Really beautiful. By changing parameters in an algorithmically defined structure, an organic mathematics is revealed in the shape of the design. First explored before the computer era by Antoni Gaudí, who wanted parabolic arches in his Sagrada Familia cathedral, and so modeled the building upside down, using weights on strings to discover the perfect complementary arches. So this cathedral, the Sagrada Familia, began in the 1890s as an Art Nouveau masterpiece. And we didn't talk about it during Art Nouveau because I wanted to save it until now. It's the most complex building in the history. It's still under construction, projected to be completed in 2026. And Gaudí wanted it to appear to fall toward the sky. And all of his arches, he wanted them to be mathematically correct in their relationship to each other, as if the church was falling toward the sky. And so what he did was he created his models based on using ropes and strings or chains that were weighted and letting all of them fall together. So he built his model of the building upside down and let the physics of the arches falling together with these weights on them dictate how the shape of the building would be, because he thought it would make it whole and complete. Here's this actual building model. Each of these nodules or spires rising downward. This is computer modeling without a computer is what it is. It's 3D modeling math without having it, right? Because he traced all these different shapes and all these different dimensions until he envisioned that he was getting what he wanted, and he based the construction of his church on that. And so this incredible structure in Spain, soon to be completed, is unique in that way. And so parametric architecture is that. It's the use of math to build something beyond just instinct or experiential practice, but that is physically complete in its relationships to the materials and to the physics that are involved. So it can often feel organic, the way that honeycomb, for instance, has a geometric pattern, but also can have an organic curve related to it. It's very interesting, it can be very beautiful, and it can be the most compelling architecture. It's very much of the moment, very popular right now. It can be dramatically over the top, as some of these images that feel very sci-fi. And it can also be sculptural and quite lovely. It can feel very futuristic, as these images do. But what we're looking for is an incorporation between pattern and natural shapes. And so parametric architecture can lead the architect to create spaces that might have been very difficult for an individual to envision and would have been literally impossible for anyone to draft or create the blueprints for. The way that these geometric shapes, these sort of Star of Davids here, are stretched precisely a little more and a little more and a little more as they radiate out from a central point. That's a level of complexity that would be very difficult to calculate by hand. And yet it's really lovely. It looks like seashells often. It looks like you're inside some large mushroom or something. Really beautiful. And it can be, you can use natural wood. You can use cross-laminated timber. So this is the cutting edge. It has been for a little while, but still the most advanced and most expensive structures being created today are often of parametric design. Our next keyword is deconstructivism. Sort of related to the advanced nature and moving away from what has been done before, deconstructivism gives the impression of the fragmentation of the constructed building. So this often alludes to previous shapes, like this one on the right looks like you took a skyscraper and chopped it up and twisted it around. Commonly characterized by an absence of harmony, continuity, or symmetry. Besides fragmentation, deconstructivism often manipulates the structure's surface skin and deploys non-rectilinear shapes which appear to distort and dislocate established elements of architecture. The finished visual appearance is characterized by unpredictability and controlled chaos. Very much controlled chaos is huge in deconstructivism. They're interesting, beautiful structures that waste a lot of interior space and are often leaky and hard to maintain, but they're certainly lovely and very, very striking. You can see that this was a style of the 90s and 2000s, and it's very much like of the moment of that time period to be a major architect and designer of the recent period was Zaha Hadid. Zaha Hadid, in 1950 to 2016, was a major British-Iraqi architect, artist, and designer. She was described by The Guardian as the queen of the curve, who liberated architectural geometry, giving it a whole new expressive identity. So Zaha Hadid and her firm continues today to practice this same style of wow architecture using parametric principles. She and her firm designed several theaters and auditoriums, many large interior spaces, always using parametric principles, but with curving natural shapes in an epic sense. This famous building encapsulates the heart of that sense of design. And this conceptual image of a complex is also a great example of the breathtaking scope and soft curve of Zaha Hadid's work. Her firm also uses some non-curvy shapes. This is another concept image for a theater or a ballet, clearly. But nonetheless, her and her firm's epic use of parametric principles is striking and made her a major modern architect. Here's another major complex here. Some very large international projects are completed by Zaha Hadid, her existing firm. Here's a lovely stadium. Another contemporary architect who is a major 20th and 21st century star architect and who is still alive today is Frank Gehry, a Canadian-born American architect and designer whose work reflects a spirit of experimentation and has remained largely unaligned with broader stylistic tendencies or movements. Gehry's work has sought to escape modernist stylistic tropes while still remaining interested in some of its underlying transformative agendas, continually working between given circumstances and unanticipated materializations. There he is. He has been assessed as someone who made us produce buildings that are fun, sculpturally exciting, good experiences. A lot of people love Frank Gehry because they are whimsical, they are lovely. He was able to get away from the past in a way that was actually lovely and fun. And most architecture, if you think back to brutalism, really didn't do that. If you made this entirely out of concrete, it would be brutalist, but it would be unusual for a brutalist structure. That kind of whimsy is not typical. This picture on the right is known as the Dancers, these seemingly two buildings next to each other. It's one structure, I believe, but their relationship is fun and sort of susical. It's a building that's in Prague. If you get a chance to go to Prague, like you're going to the Quadrennial or something, be sure to check out the Dancers, this Frank Gehry structure. But overall, Frank Gehry was just known. He was controversial in a lot of ways. Some of these buildings leak a lot and have to have their panels replaced all the time. As an architect, of course, you want to be concerned with that. And as a designer, you want to be concerned with the functionality and use of something. But you also want to be concerned with the breathtaking and setting the story the way you want it to be done. And striking the right balance is something that... something not to be ashamed of throughout a career, of finding that balance. Frank Gehry's work is astonishing and wholly unique, and it's rare that a designer or an architect can say that. And so those are our keywords for modern and contemporary architecture. Let's go through them. Contemporary, sustainable, cross-laminated timber, Blobitecture, parametric, Deconstructivism, Zaha Hadid, and Frank Gehry. Thank you very much for being in this final lecture of the class. I've enjoyed this class very, very much, although I wish I could have seen you all in person. We have some upcoming projects. Stay aware of those and look at the syllabus, and please reach out to me if you have any questions at all. Thank you very much, and I look forward to talking with you again soon.